Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 52nd edition of Data Bites, hosted by Public Digital. I'm Gavin Freeguard, and it's wonderful to see so many of you this evening here at Broadway House and online. Let's start in the usual way. Hands up if you've been to Data Bites before. Welcome back. Hands up if this is your first Data Bites. Welcome. And since this is our first event of 2025, a very happy new year to you all as well. Yes, the bulletin of the atomic scientists, not just any atomic scientists, the atomic scientists, celebrated 2025 by setting the doomsday clock at 89 seconds to midnight, citing developments in AI alongside war, nuclear weapons, climate change and pandemic. It's apparently the closest humanity has ever been to destruction, as you can see from this chart. The closer the line to the top, the closer we are to the apocalypse. Now, obviously, correlation is not causation, but if we look at the record-breaking years, we'll see it lines up perfectly with the nearly 6-year existence of Data Bites. Now, don't worry too much. Commentators have criticised the doomsday clock for using made-up numbers, like those consultancy reports on how many jobs AI will sweep away, or departmental submissions to the spending review. Now, let's kick off with some housekeeping. We are on the record and are being live-streamed, obviously. If you are still, for some reason, on social media of some description, the hashtag is PDDataBites, and you can put your questions to our speakers via Slido, which is bit.ly/databytes52, all lowercase. If you're here in the room, you can, of course, raise your hand as well. What does DataBites do? Well, we aim to put good work involving data on the record so we can all learn from it, provide a space for the different data communities in and around government to come together, and bring to life what better data can do for all of us, whether we think of ourselves as data people or not. How does Data Bites work? Well, this evening you're going to be treated to 4 presentations on interesting data projects. Each of our speakers will have 8 minutes to present. Yes, just 8 minutes. There are 8 bits in a byte, hence 8 minutes in a data byte. Each speaker will then take questions for 8 minutes. Yes, just 8 minutes. And then we'll move on to the next speaker. So 4 presentations of 8 minutes, each followed by questions for 8 minutes. You can watch the previous 2 Data Bites at Public Digital, including last month's, at bit.ly/pddatabytes, all lowercase. The 49 before that were hosted by the Institute for Government. You can watch those at bit.ly/ifgdatabytes, capital IFGDB. That one is Data Bites 8, exactly 5 years ago today. 5 years? What have I done with my life? That was February 2020. Little did we know it would be March 2022 before we were back in person. Now, as regular attendees know, we like to start by reviewing what's happened in politics and government since we last met with some charts. Westminster broke up in December before the new year brought the return of intrigue, plotting, incessant talking, misguided action and fringe interests. I'm very glad that yourselves have remained faithful to Data Bites. Now, during the Brexit years, and last week was the 5th anniversary of Brexit, one of our measures of political chaos was ministerial resignations, which seems almost quaint now. January saw the 2nd resignation under this government, which gives us an excuse to revisit the famous ministerial resignation chart. And if we zoom into that very busy bottom corner, we can see Keir Starmer is still behind Johnson, Sunak and Brown at this stage. Now, British politics has actually felt relatively stable recently compared to what's gone before, given what's been happening elsewhere. We'll come to the obvious shortly, but February will bring an unexpected election in Germany. Justin Trudeau will soon be departing as Prime Minister of Canada, or Governor of the 51st state, as some people would prefer. And since we last met, there's also been a change of Prime Minister in France. Now, they've had 11 since Angela Merkel first became German Chancellor, compared to a mere 8 Prime Ministers in the UK. Beaten by the French. A feeling us Welsh rugby fans have gotten used to this week. But fear not. There is still one prime ministerial metric where the UK is world-beating. Now, speaking of world-beating, that's a reputation the UK has long had when it comes to data and digital government. But last month, alongside a blueprint for the new digital centre of government, which included a revamped government digital service, DCIT published a pretty honest review on the current state of the digital state. So we're going to do something we've not done in a while here at Data Bytes. We're going to have a quick quiz. It's relatively exciting there. I mean, that's fine. The quizzical centre of government, if you like. Not really. So the review included a survey of digital leaders across government. So we'll now see how closely you all read that paper. What percentage of those surveyed said that their data landscape is not coordinated, interoperable, or enables a unified source of truth? So the higher scores are worse. We've got A, 50%, B, 60%, C, 70%, or D, 80%. So if you're in the room, or even if you're not, raise your hands for A, 50%. Nobody. B, 60%. C, 70%. And D, 80%. It's pretty evenly split, and in fact, the correct answer was C, 70%. So not quite as bad as some of you thought, which brings us nicely to somewhere where things are much worse than we thought, which is the US. Now, rather than just endlessly screaming, I tried to find a visual representation of what's currently going on in the United States. Now, we could look at international relations and the various territories President Trump has made some sort of threat or claim over, or the tariffs that have been imposed or nearly imposed. We could look at the data sets and web pages that have been removed from federal websites, which is tricky to count. But earlier this week, the New York Times put it at more than 8,000 web pages, including scientific research, data, policies and documentation around data, health advice, and lots on diversity and discrimination. And that doesn't include the USAID website, which simply says that nearly all staff will be placed on administrative leave. That's just one of the initiatives of Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, now part of the US Digital Service, or US DOGE Service, who are also running roughshod over lots of different data. A coup d'etat, as one Blue Sky user put it. It wasn't even mine. Now, perhaps the fall in Tesla share prices and sales will make you feel a little bit better. Although for completeness, it actually doesn't look that bad if you take it back another 12 months. But perhaps the most depressing Trump chart is this one. Any ideas what that is showing us? That is how far through Trump's 4-year term that we are. I would call it a progress bar, but it really isn't. On the plus side, though, after tonight, there will be 39 more data bytes through the Trump presidency. I'll leave you to decide whether that leaves you feeling better or worse. Now, turning to tonight's speakers, we have had a late lineup change. Sadly, Laura Gilbert, formerly of 10DS and I.AI, and now at the Ellison Institute of Technology in Oxford, is unable to make it, but we look forward to having her speak at another Data Byte soon. In her place, we're going to be starting with Luke Hounsome from the UK Health Security Agency on the UK HSA's AI work, and specifically, how do we know if AI works? Huge thanks to Luke for standing in at the last minute. Second, we'll be in the room for David Canning from the Cabinet Office on digital records management and how he conquered the digital heap. Our third presentation will be another virtual one, and that will be Shona Nicol and Joyce Dalgleish from the Scottish Government on the vision for public sector data in Scotland. And our fourth and final presentation, making his second Data Bytes appearance, is Matt Kerlogue from the Blavatnik School of Government in Oxford on the Blavatnik Index of Public Administration 2024. How do civil services compare to each other? The next Data Bytes will be on Wednesday, the 5th of March, and as you can see, we have dates for your diary through to the summer. If you work for a public sector organisation and would like to speak or know someone who should, come and speak to me afterwards or email events@public.digital. And that is more than enough from me, so we'll be going to our first speaker, and that is Luke. So hopefully, Luke, you can hear us. We have your slides on.
I can hear you. Thank you, Gavin. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can indeed.
Great. Well, I shall set the timer on my watch for this very precise 8 minutes and try to hopefully give the audience some enjoyment as I condense what was a 45-minute presentation at Data Connect 24 down into some of the essence of the slides, which is around the work my team in UK HSA has done on trying to really set a quantitative benchmark of performance for large language models in public health. So it's like, click on these slides and hopefully they'll move for you. This we don't really need to see, but I think it's always useful if we're coming back to look at these later, particularly the optimistic, upbeat conclusion. When I think about AI and the way it works in public health, and I guess this goes for government in general, I kind of think there are two different ways in which we can benefit from the use of AI, and particularly here I'm talking about large language models. The large language models can read and produce text in a very human-like way. AI can deliver for us in a couple of different ways. We can do new things, what I've categorized in this box as productivity gains. We can access data that might have not been able to do before, or link things together in a way that's just a bit too tricky for a person to do. But also we can do some of the same things that we do normally and do them a bit better. We can use fewer resources to achieve the same outcome. That's about improving efficiency. And then the two go together hand in hand. You can make the organization work a bit better. You might be able to do something new for public health, but together they work towards achieving our mission to make better public health security for this country. Now, that's all great, but we do have to worry a little bit about some of the risks of using AI. I've just dropped a couple on the board here in pictures. On the left, we have a sort of a well-known AI meme, which is where certain models, I've included two different ones here to try not to show bias, struggle with seemingly simple questions about the numbers of letters that are in a word. Obviously, a pretty easy error to spot, but pointing out, in fact, that there might be errors which are harder to spot in what AI does. Perhaps more worrying for those of us working in the public sector, where we're often hoping to address inequalities and inequities in society, there is bias in AI. But AI is trained on, or large language models are trained on human data. Humans are biased. What you put in will reflect the biases of the data it has been trained on. These pictures are from a really interesting article from The Lancet that I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at, where they tried to get, this was ChatGPT, to produce some pictures of black doctors treating white children. And unfortunately, ChatGPT was unable to break out of that racist stereotype of the white savior doctor coming to help black children in African countries. Now, obviously, manufacturers and designers of AI will be and AI models will be working to address these, but it is important that we think quite critically about how we can measure if AI is working for ourselves in the public sector and beyond. And there's a big reputational risk in doing that as well as sort of actually doing the job right. There is a lot of fear about the use of AI in society. You can see here some of the things that I've been talking about: racially biased algorithms, the fact that chatbots might start to suggest illegal or unethical things to people to do, and people have really genuine concerns. So it's really important that we can show that what we're doing works properly. We have the ability to sort of do the human check on AI, where we might have a subject matter expert who can review the input text and independently answer the question. This is a very labour-intensive and long process. It's incredibly important in setting out our way of testing large language models. But in daily use, if we were, say, testing whether a new model was an improvement in certain areas, to get someone to go through all that text and check it all again would just be really, really too hard. So people who design AI models do put out some quantitative data on how well their models perform. These tend to use sort of maths, logic, some law, some medical data sets which are in the public domain, so they can all use and give a comparison against each other. And while that's really, really helpful, when you're working in kind of a specialist field like public health, we need something that's a little bit more focused. Public health might include lots of terms, for example, around, say, for example, sexual contact or drug use, which some large language model designers try to keep out for reasons of, say, ethics or acceptability into certain age groups and cultures. So what we're really looking at in my team is trying to build up a set of benchmark data sets which fall in this little green circle overlapping area where there's a specific domain knowledge, and it can do the sort of tasks that we're interested in, which are largely around classifying data, extracting data, and summarizing. So we've worked, and this table is taken from a paper we've published to set up a whole set of reproducible data sets, expertly verified, some of which come from the public domain and some of which come from our work within UK HSA, to rigorously assess the accuracy and validity of lots of different types of models, including the one I've highlighted in green, Llama 3 70 billion, which is our current working model we've got deployed on our secure internal AI system. The system that we've set up specifically to essentially prove or disprove that large language models can be a useful and accurate support to public health professionals for making public health decisions. There are some challenges. Some of the external benchmarks are of poor quality. Some of the answers in them are objectively wrong. And as we get longer and more unstructured outputs, it becomes harder and harder in some ways for the model to make the best results from them. So there are continuing challenges in this area. But nonetheless, and to sort of finish on a bit of an example, we have incorporated this sort of validity checking and delivered a real AI project to support public health professionals in UK HSA. So a little bit of background to this, what we call the TB country of birth tool. Should you move to the UK from a country which is a high risk for TB, basically based on the prevalence of TB in that population, you will be offered a test, a single X-ray screening, or you'll be invited to that. And that eligibility is really determined by just reviewing GP registration forms, hundreds of thousands of them a year. A lot of that's automated, but about 10,000 per quarter need someone to read through them. That's a lot of work and a lot of time. And of course, the great thing about this having gone on for a while is we have a great test set. The country of birth has been tagged on tens of thousands of these, so we can really test the quality as an automated benchmark for our models. And we've deployed a large language model which categorizes that country of birth with very high accuracy. Has given us the bonus of categorizing some records which are very ambiguous in their name for humans to look through and do the searches and the looking through directories and phone books and everything they might need to do. It does leave a small number of records to be reviewed manually, but we've decreased the sort of manual reading work for the TB team by about 80%, all while showing a very high accuracy because we're able to do it in this very structured way. So that's a real, I think, example of the benefit that can come if you approach validating and designing AI properly and have a really good test set to show that it can work. So as an optimistic, upbeat conclusion, because I'm now 4 seconds over, AI as a way to support subject matter experts, I think has a real potential. We're still in the early days of doing quite extensive validation to prove that this is correct. But as we do more and more of these projects which are similar, we hope to do a lighter touch validation as we become more confident in the outputs and use this more widely across the organisation. That's my slides done. I look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Luke. I will now go to the audience for questions. A reminder, if you're watching us online, or indeed even if you're in the room, you can use Slido, which is bit.ly/databytes52 if you're not already there. Please do tell us who you are if you can. Though remember, we are on the record. Please wait for the mic if you're in the room. And please do keep your questions short, as the timer will start with the first question. So I'm going to come to the room for the first question, and we've got a question right there.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Harry from DXW. 90% accuracy is very cool. I'm wondering what you do with the 10%. Like, how do you, in your kind of live process, how do you catch the 10% and sort of redirect them into some other processor?
Yeah, so it's very important. There's two things to, I think, pick up here when we think about the use of AI in general and data validity. So in this situation, we're happy to direct those results back to a person to look at, because a person would have always looked at them anyway. So we're not generating additional work for that person. The second thing is that in the TB testing process as a whole, the default is, if you are unsure, to offer that test to a person, because it's much better to offer a test to someone who doesn't need it than to miss someone who potentially does. That's the sort of general rule of thumb in public health testing there. So those 10% which aren't classified, they get manually reviewed, and then even then, if there's still some ambiguity, people get invited to the test anyway.
Great, thank you. I will stay in the room for the next question. Who would like to ask something of Luke? Go on. Otherwise, you'll force me to ask a question. Luke, I mean, I've heard quite a few people deploying and piloting AI systems in government having a similar conversation about how you actually benchmark, how you understand whether things are working, whether they're working well. To what extent are you working with others across government or sharing some of the things that you're coming up with on all of this?
Yeah, great question. We connect into other areas of government on a more formal basis. So there's someone else in my organisation whose role it is to work data science across government. He's like our head of data science profession. So he takes on this role as well. As well as that, we try to sort of collaborate quite extensively with academic groups on this. I think because we're in such a novel place, developing like this sort of best practice or looking to others for best practice, that collaboration is really important. So obviously always welcome people reaching out and contacting me to do that. I think what we do find is that different organizations across government have got slightly different priorities about how they want to use AI, which is very understandable because it's a pretty broad range of things it can do. Some are focusing on sort of efficiency and helping the sort of daily office job become a bit easier. Some are working on more focused and targeted planning and interventions, predicting hospital admissions, for example, in the health sector. And the way in which you evaluate those will be slightly different. So I think the more people are trying to do different things and the more they share it, that will be better. So one thing I'll flag, which the Cabinet Office is running, is what's called the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard. You can Google that, or other search engines are available, and look at that. And so government departments are putting up on there their records of how they've used AI and other machine learning complex algorithms for supporting public decision making, and that's also a great window into what other people are doing and how they're evaluating that works, because you have to put all that sort of thing about model performance in there. So what I really like about the way AI is going in the UK is that really transparent, open approach, which I think is really needed when we're at this cutting edge and trying to sort of do something a bit new.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question for Luke. I'll come to you first and we'll come to you next.
Thank you. And how do you contain the enthusiasm for your poorly informed technology enthusiasts in your organisation that AI is going to solve every problem?
I think that's a real challenge. I think actually one of the things that worries me most about the use of AI in general is that it is obviously very, very powerful. But I think people are perhaps a little bit too trusting of it sometimes. I've had conversations with colleagues who say, I want to use it to summarize a questionnaire. And you say, well, how are you going to check it's right? Oh, I just know it does this well. I think we need to be really careful to think about testing and evaluation at all stages. I can only speak for UKHSA, but I would imagine it's the same across many other government departments, and that we're really trying to work across the board, I suppose, strategically would be the other word. So we know that if we're going to deploy AI and do it well, there's not just the sort of technology type things that my team does, but there's an education piece, talking to people about, if you're going to use AI day to day, you're aware about how you might spot these biases, you're aware how you might spot missing information. So I try to support and feed into a lot of that educational piece, I guess. We've got an educational piece. We've got like technology pieces like what our team is doing in terms of sort of setting up validatable benchmarks, and also there's a bit of a technology solution in restricting exactly what people can do at the moment. As you may know, across government, most public AI LLMs like ChatGPT or Copilot or Anthropic models are not allowed to be used for official data, and that's kind of part of containing that until I suppose people get used to this new technology.
Great, thank you. We had a question over there next. Just wait for the mic.
Thank you very much. Hi, good evening, Rishi Sharda. Thanks, Luke, for your presentation. I'm just building on the theme around collaborating in the ecosystem, if I put it that way. A lot of government departments, agencies like yourself are exploring AI, and et cetera, et cetera. And you'll be aware DCIT recently announced the initiative to have a national data library. And the intention of that is around, not exposing, but making data more accessible to the wider industry and ecosystem. I'm just kind of keen for your perspective. What opportunities do you think there are from a health perspective in terms of releasing data to sort of outsource some of the analysis to support some of the public sector, public health decisions?
That's a great question. When I saw the announcement of the National Data Library, I've worked in public health for 17 years, quite a lot of that closely with people in the NHS and NHS England. There are some significant challenges around something like that data library. And I think there's, for me, a focus on maybe I say this because I'm coming from public health, but for me, the benefits that could come from sharing something like that would be for wider societal bodies, charities, third sector, commercial, to be able to put their lens on data sets in a way that, I can't, coming from a public health background, which is just, I'm focused on things like health security, obviously, and health inequities. But, other organizations might be able to access something through the data library. It does depend on what data's in there, and put their take on something. So my sort of hope of the things that would come out of that would be new perspective on societal problems, inequities in society, for example, and for people to be able to sort of compare that with their own knowledge. We still need that subject matter expertise to analyze a lot of this data and make meaning out of it. And of course, those subject matter experts are spread across society, government, local government, charities, other sectors. And so the great thing that I hope to come out from that would just be a whole range of different perspective on societal problems and how we might go about addressing them. I'm not sure that particularly answered your question. That was more of my sort of saying what I really hope will happen.
Well, Luke, thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. And to condense 45 minutes down to 8 minutes with 3 hours notice was particularly impressive. So
thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And apologies to Jonathan Flowers, whose question online we didn't get to, but we will try and get that answered at some point. We are back in the room for our second speaker, and that's David.
Right, so first of all, we'll talk about what has been called the digital heap. So the rapid pace of technological change over the past 20 years has had a profound impact on information and records management. Word processing applications were initially used to replace the typewriter. Documents were created digitally, then printed off, stored in physical files. And as the idea of the paperless office took off in the mid-2000s, electronic document and records management systems were introduced as an attempt to replace physical filing. It was believed, perhaps reasonably at the time, that people would declare the final version of a document by moving a file from its place of creation to a records repository and delete all the other earlier versions and drafts. This is not what happened in practice. So in 2016, the UK government commissioned Sir Alex Allen to carry out a review of government digital records and archives. And in his report, Sir Alex wrote, in typically British understatement, that this approach had not worked well. And, quotes, as a result, almost all departments have a mass of digital data stored on shared drives that is poorly organised and indexed. And this became known as the digital heap. The government's official response in 2017 acknowledged that there had been a collective and systemic failure. Now, this failure is not unique to the government or to the UK. It's acknowledged in every sector worldwide. because a new system of working had been created along with supporting technologies to accommodate it, but these failed to take into account or correctly predict human behaviour. Faced with burdensome processes, if doing the correct and proper thing would cause a person inconvenience or place them at a competitive disadvantage to others, they will likely not do it. We are losing our memory. And this is a problem because good information and records management reduces cost and risk and drives value across the business. In government, it's vital for accountability, transparency, legal compliance, and frankly, we are the curators of the collective history and memory of our nation. So the government is faced with finding and preserving its important digital records and sifting these out from the mass of redundant, outdated and trivial or ephemeral information, which we call rot. The challenge of the digital paradigm is fourfold. First of all, volume. Volumes will vary, but in the Cabinet Office, at least, the volume of digital record is about 1,000 times more than it ever was compared to when we were just dealing with paper. File plans are a pretty unique digital concept. In the world of paper records management, documents are created and placed on files, usually in some sort of chronological order, but in the digital world, documents relating to a subject may be distributed across a file plan, mixed up with several other subjects, and do not appear in logical or chronological order. And digital records can be in lots and lots of different formats, such as office documents, emails, images, PDFs. These records can be distributed also not just across a file plan, but across lots of different repositories, such as Outlook or other messaging systems like Facebook, for example. People message each other on Facebook, don't they? So, and metadata corruption is also a really bad problem. Metadata is essential for understanding the age and content of digital collections, but it's easily corrupted through the careless replatforming of digital systems, the careless data transfer between systems, and this corruption actually makes it harder to understand our data. And sometimes metadata is completely absent and completely unreliable. So what we needed was a new methodology. Rather than patch technological analogues into traditional ways of working, we required a completely new method of doing things that would more easily accommodate digital systems and accommodate also human nature. Now, what you're seeing on the screen right now is what we call the hopper approach. When they reach a certain point in their life cycle, all records get put into the top and are progressively filtered out through layers of analysis. And the importance of this approach is that it is simple. It does not place onerous demands on busy people by asking them to add metadata tags or metadata even being present, although that's always useful, or for people to do things like declare records to another location. The volumes in this slide, which you can see there, refer to a collection where we tested our methodology and we applied our first AI tool. And there's a legacy collection of 12 million digital records. And so for the automated document review part of that methodology, we developed an algorithm that provides for the automated analysis of metadata, text content, and format. And we weight this to create an indicator of that individual record's value as a historic record. And it's a rule-based system that includes a language model which we have nicknamed the lexicon. So let me talk you through this. First, empty and size 0 files are screened out. The remaining files are then divided into indexable and non-indexable files. The next step is to divide the files by file types, depending on whether we wish to apply a bias towards retention or deletion. And from looking at how people in the civil service have commonly used different file formats, we were able to conclude that most of our records exist in word processor formats. So we had an assumption towards retention for that file type. PDFs and emails where people have taken the trouble to put them in a shared drive, we assumed were important, so we biased towards retention there. But spreadsheets and presentation slides, generally speaking, were not records because of the way people were using them. They were generally informative documents or financial documents that had limited historic value. And image and video files, depending on which department you're in, but in the Cabinet Office, we don't usually see those as valuable, except when they're records, potentially of photographs rather, of the Prime Minister, which we do actually hold as official records. So the lexicon of weighted terms are then applied to these documents, having sifted through the first few layers. And they're further divided into 8 classifications, 4 of which are for retention and 4 for deletion. And at the end, human reviewers can check the outcomes and through a process of dip sampling satisfy themselves that the algorithm and the lexicon are all operating as expected. And once these checks are completed, the files flagged for retention are moved to an archive and the rest destroyed. So here's some examples. The lexicon was derived largely from our tacit knowledge of terms and phrases commonly used in the civil service. Words and phrases discovered in documents that appeared to denote value or were rot. A standard taxonomy was also used to construct this in some cases, and examples of terms that we recognise as usually indicating value might be things like minister or inquiry, bilateral or nuclear. Some examples on the screen there. Proper nouns, names of people or places or senior staff, international leaders. And so we were also able to identify the converse, language patterns that indicate rot, such as annual leave, blah, blah, yes, people really use that in our documents, Christmas cards and stuff. Now AI, introducing any AI, and changing any system from an analog system to a digital system introduces new risk. So introducing this new digitally focused methodology, we understood that the risk dynamic had changed. So consequently, there was a need to understand and assess this and develop appropriate mitigations. And these risks were identified first as transparency. AI and automated processes need to be understandable, not a black box, with clearly agreed margins for error and a system for monitoring and assuring error rates. Also, trust. Any automated approach needs to be demonstrably trustworthy in arriving at consistently good outcomes. And so we established baselines for accuracy and speed through time in motion studies of comparative human-driven records review. And it needs to be repeatable. While the lexicon approach allowed for repetition of the same methodology in any information collection, collections of documents may have unique characteristics that need to be understood and accounted for. So the lexicon is updated, our language model is updated to take account of these every time we apply it to a new collection. So finally, outcomes. Using AI to automate disposal of digital records has provided several benefits. And our business case for AI was and remains highly positive. It is cheaper to run, it avoids downstream costs, it's more consistently accurate than human reviewers. And the Cabinet Office's legacy collection, referred to earlier, would have taken one person 59 years to review, and we would have had to have employed an army of a small army of document reviewers, neither of which was a feasible option. So the AI was able to accurately and rapidly review this volume of 12 million documents within our annual disposal cycle. We did it all in a year. And the cost avoided, of not having to employ 59 people, we estimated would have been £2.2 million of taxpayers' money. So the ongoing cost of the entire system that we built, all the technologies, all the people in it to run it, remains at £200,000 cheaper than the alternative, which was human beings reading everything, making judgments. So, questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, David. A reminder, especially for those of you online, but also those of you in the room, if you would like to put questions via Slido, it's bit.ly/databytes52 if you're not there already. Let's start in the room again. Who would like to ask a first question of David? I'll go to you first, you second, then I'll go online and we'll come to the front.
Hi there, Alex Blanford, University of Oxford. Question was about the interaction with the National Archives. I very briefly worked on this 5-6 years ago. The big driver then was we're going to miss records that, especially around the Iraq War, that were going to be released. How have you, and the big problem was big hard drives full of Lotus Notes stuff sitting in a basement somewhere. Yeah. How have you dealt with stuff that was extremely legacy when plugging it into a system like this?
Okay, so we haven't really got to grips with email properly yet. So Lotus Notes makes me shudder a bit if I ever came across that. But the way to deal with old formats like that is that when we inject the data into our system, we inject it as a text file. So we don't worry about it screens format because we know what format it is. So we automatically bias towards, as I say, Word documents as opposed to Excel spreadsheets. But when we ingest the data and we do the semantic analysis, it's just looking at text.
Thanks. We had another question just across the aisle there. Yeah.
Hi, Ivana Balkan from the Government Office for Tech Transfer. I guess it's touching on the point of the National Archives. Have you used them at all as a collaborator or as a user research testbed, basically, to this tool? Because I think there's some vital learnings that kind of need to be shared between the National Archives and the Cabinet Office.
Yeah, so we work closely with both the National Archives and the Central Digital and Data Office as we were developing this. When we created the prototype and we were running our testing, we actually went over to Kew and we demonstrated it to their digital people and to their archives research team. They then did a deeper dive on it. We wanted them to come in and kick the tires and find the gaps because, first of all, we needed to convince our senior leaders that this was safe to switch on, and the National Archives saying this looks okay was a good test for that. But also, we wanted the National Archives, of all people, to have confidence that we were actually doing the right thing. Because what the outcome of this is that we are essentially deciding what is the record of the Cabinet Office's, what's the Cabinet Office's historic record. And that will eventually make its way to the National Archive. And so, because it was the first time that human beings had not actively gone through everything and selected records, we needed to demonstrate that it was giving us the right answer. And so we did actually use the National Archives, and we kind of like to say, although they didn't necessarily say it in so many words, that this has got the TNA's endorsement all over it because they did tell us that they were happy with what we were doing.
Flowing on quite nicely from that, I'm going to go online to a question from Jonathan Flowers. Good evening to you, Jonathan. Could there be things in the ROT that would be of value to historians, so context, etc.? Has this approach been signed off by historians?
I do work with some historians on this. I've been working also with a lady called Professor Lisa Jalent from the University of Loughborough, and I've presented this to her, and I've actually co-written a paper with her on this and with her input on, essentially it's about access to archives and how, while you've got very good search technologies, ROT is actually a barrier towards accessing the right stuff in an archive. Simply because of all the reasons I've given: corruption, volume, complexity. So we do work with historians on it, have worked with historians on this, and digital humanities people, right? So the other thing is that you can't keep everything. There are a number of reasons why you can't keep everything. The Public Records Act requires people like me across government to select records for permanent preservation. The selection of those records is determined by what we call a record selection policy, which the National Archives requires us to publish. So there's a number of legal reasons why you wouldn't want to keep everything. Because, for example, the Data Protection Act. You can't keep personal data beyond the purposes for which it was collected. And an awful lot of our information falls into that bucket. You shouldn't keep records that are a contingent liability on the organisation, because they're not historically important, but they are a liability because you have a liability under freedom of information. And so as the volume of data grows and grows and grows and grows, that you have to search more and more of it, and it takes more and more resource to manage that. It also costs a huge amount of money even in cloud computing, to store this stuff. And you've got to bear in mind the climate impact of all that data storage. Deleting stuff actually is good for climate change, because it reduces the carbon footprint of the data centre that it's being stored in.
Great, thank you. We had a question down here at the front.
Thanks very much. I'm Ollie Clifton-Moore from UKHSA. You've talked about reducing the digital heap. Is there any value in trying to reduce the heap becoming so big in the first place?
So really what you're talking about there is training people to essentially there's two elements to this. One is training people to kind of create the right records and think about when they're creating the right records. That's really, really hard to do. What we've had to do to train our people to kind of fit in with this system. I mean, you've got to see this thing as a system. People create stuff in the digital context. We store it and we manage it, and at some point it flows through into our disposal engine, and then it flows through into our archive or into the dustbin. So that whole life cycle management is something we've thought through. And we've thought about how the people are interacting with the life cycle at the very beginning. But the only thing really you can do is get people to name things correctly so you can find them again, put them in the right place so they're under control, and you don't have data loss. In terms of the volume, what you're talking about there is modal shift. So you try and encourage people to use instant messaging more than email, for example. Talk to each other rather than sending an email. That's a hard one. But so there's only so much you can do with that in terms of creating the stuff in the first place. The other thing you can do, though, is make sure you've got a really good retention policy and you actually apply it, because there's an awful lot of stuff that we create which we can get rid of after a year, 3 years, few years, 7 years. And so this is part of the digital heap, conquering the digital heap issue, is that you just have to apply life cycle management. And the reason why the heap accumulated in the first place because life cycle management got badly interrupted by technology.
Thanks. I'm going to go online for a very light, easy question to answer in under a minute. This is from Anonymous. Good evening to you, Anonymous. Do you think issues like the digital heap emerge from a perceived absence of scarcity?
Perceived that if they're in the room, I'd ask them to clarify that. I think a perceived absence of scarcity. No, I don't think so. If I understand what the question is about, the digital heap arose, and this is all in, as I say, the reports I've referenced, because technology changed. We made some bad judgments about human behaviour, and it took government a few years to get round to realising that there was a problem. And it was a number of other slightly related but not directly related things that led Sir Alex Allen into that rabbit hole, if you like, which meant that he said, actually, I was looking at one thing and I've actually discovered this bigger thing. That's what he's basically said to the Cabinet Secretary. Can I look at that? And so Jeremy Hayward said, yes, please go and have a look at that. And we ended up with the Allen report. And the Allen report basically said this mountain of stuff is growing around us because people are afraid to throw things away. And because the technology doesn't allow you to do that in the way you'd want, and because the technologies we had applied don't work, or the people don't work with the technologies. And so we've had to completely rethink that. And part of the battle I've had is actually convincing my technology colleagues that it's safe to throw away all that data. But the way to do that is have a retention policy, a very clear policy about who is responsible for that, why you do it, when you do it, and the fact that you document and keep a record of everything, every decision you make, so it's defendable. And in reaction to partly to the Allen Review and to reflect everything I've just said, the National Archives, with us, republished a Code of Practice, which is issued under the Freedom of Information Act for Records Management in 2021, which essentially brought all of that code of practice up to date with digital. And it says exactly that. It says basically part of records management is not just keeping stuff, it's throwing stuff away. But you've got to keep the right stuff and throw the right stuff away.
Well, you've given us plenty of right stuff to hold on to in those 16 minutes. David, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We're going to go online now to Shona and Joyce. So, good evening, Edinburgh. This is London calling. Can you hear us?
I can indeed, and I hope you can hear me okay.
We can indeed. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And hi, everyone who's in London and online as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a bit of work that Joyce and myself have been doing probably over the last year or so on developing a vision for public sector data in Scotland, which maybe doesn't sound massively exciting. I don't know what people think about it, but I think for most of us who are maybe on the call today, we kind of all know how vital public sector data is in making sure that the services that we're providing to the people of Scotland are delivered kind of efficiently and effectively. And although I think there's been a really kind of ever-growing awareness of that sort of power of data to improve the way that we design and deliver these services. What we often find is we get feedback from data professionals in the public sector that they face some difficulties when trying to influence colleagues and senior leaders around that need to invest in data. And I guess this feedback comes from a couple of different or several different channels, I guess. So within Scottish Government, we run a data maturity cohort, and we've been running it for 5 years. We put public sector organisations through a 6-month programme that really helps them think about what it is they're trying to do with data, and gets them to sort of started on that data improvement journey. We also have a number of communities of practice that we've been establishing over the last few years. And from both of these sort of channels, we've consistently heard, from these data professionals that they really need some help to influence others in their organisation, to drive change in their organisation, and give a little bit of weight to some of their discussions that they're having about why data is important and why senior managers need to take data more seriously. So I guess the vision has really been a sort of, it's been developed as a response to that need, and maybe giving a little bit of context to people who are trying to support that change and innovation in the public sector around data. So, we're really hoping that this work on the vision will give that little bit of greater confidence to people, so that when they're trying to have those communications, that they can really, explain it well, really give them the sort of tools and the power that they need to influence their own stakeholders. So thinking about that this is as a little bit of a ripple effect, that we give people something that they'll be able to use within their own organisation, all of which, the aim of all of this is about supporting the way that the Scottish public sector is with their data, be a bit more strategic in the way it approaches its data. So, again, this is about giving, an enabling thing. So giving data professionals that ability to speak with one voice, helping them drive forward that goal of data improvement. And I guess we've been thinking about this for quite some time, and, recognise that need in the community, but also recognise that Scottish Government couldn't do this alone. Like we can't just say we want this to happen. We need much broader buy-in from across the public sector, and ownership around some of this as well. So I guess that going into this, what we wanted to do was very much think about co-creating this vision. So myself and Joyce in Scottish Government, we worked alongside NHS, NSS, which is National Services Scotland, and the Data Lab, which is an innovation centre in Scotland, to, I guess, open it up and let lots of people get involved in the development of this data vision. So our role really in this was about enabling this work to happen rather than kind of directing where it went. And so I guess, what actually have we done? So, we put out a call for volunteers. It was an open call, probably spring last year. We got around, I think, about 100 individuals applied for it. We had to, unfortunately, whittle that down to 30 who were selected to take part in some workshops that we ran over the summer. And those members who came along to the workshops, came from a range of backgrounds. So we had people from the public sector, from the private sector, third sector, and organisations that were both kind of small ones and much larger ones as well. And I guess the process that we put them through, we worked with some consultants, a company called LunaWorks, and DEMSOC as well, to run the workshops. It was 3 workshops that lasted a day, and we were basically asking people to look into the future. So look 20 years, 14 and 7 years into the future. And we gave them some scenarios to help them think about the kind of complex issues that were likely to face Scotland in 20 years and 14 years and 7 years, and what the potential was for data to support that. Like, what kind of creative solutions could we use data to help, help with those scenarios. Really to get people to step outside, so they're not thinking about their own organisational problems and challenges with data, and maybe not thinking about the technologies either, thinking about, like, what is that future going to look like and how does data help with it. So The outputs of all of these sessions were kind of analysed, pulled together. We've got a first draft of the vision. I will share a little link at the end of this so people can go away and have a little look at that as well. We published that towards the end of last year through one of the organisations that we've been working with, the Data Lab, and we gave. So that was published, and that moved us into what we call the challenge phase. So this is where we gave organisations or anyone, individuals, organisations, 6 weeks to kind of look over this, give us our views, and tell us what they thought about it. Because again, this is, we're only doing this because we think it's got value and we think that people can use it. So what we really wanted is to understand, is this going to be useful to people? So we've gathered lots of feedback. I think we had about 71 responses for that. And we're now just starting that process of iterating another version of the vision. So, but what does it look like? So, we have this high level, I guess, long-term vision, which is Scotland's data advances innovation and well-being for people and planet. That in itself, lovely, but it's underpinned by 5 different ambitions. So we've got an ambition on data-informed decision-making. So that's just about, that we are using data to make decisions, innovating, addressing some of the big societal challenges that we have. The next ambition was around trust, and that was talking about how we can empower sort of Scotland's people and that they draw benefit from a data-informed society. The third ambition was around environmental and societal benefits, so that we have a resilient, healthy environment and a thriving society. Design for all, so this is about data-informed services, that they're seamless, that they enable people within Scotland to navigate their daily lives. And the last one was around embracing change. We make decisions, but we've got to think about our responsibility to future generations on that as well. So some of these were things maybe we didn't necessarily expect. So I think some of the trust stuff came out a lot when we were getting to look at that future scenarios. And just so you don't think it was all plain sailing, these workshops, although we got all this lovely stuff out of them, there were some strong differences of opinion in some areas that we're really going to have to dive into a lot deeper and understand maybe some of the different opinions as well. But those ambitions, we've got a number of objectives that sit underneath them and what we're calling enabling conditions, so the things that we have to put in place to get us to that ambition. And I guess that, this is all about helping the public sector and public sector organisations to coordinate and align their data activities. So it's about alignment. This isn't really about the road that individual organisations might need to travel as they're going on their own sort of data improvement projects, but how we can align around it. And I guess part of the vision, one of the little aspects of this was there is also ways that you could use this. So we had something called the 5 I's, which was you could use this vision to influence, inspire, include, inform, and improve. So where do we go from here? I guess this is just the beginning. That vision development is the beginning. We're likely to, and probably the easiest part. So we've got a lot more to do. We're moving into that realisation phase now. We're probably in a little bit of a learning phase. We don't quite know how this is all going to work out, but we've got the outcomes, the plan from the vision to get us there. So we've got to update that final version. We want to look at all of the different bits of activity that's out there that already aligns to the vision, look at the resources that are out there and try and bring all of this together a little bit. But, just to maybe, sort of really get this a little bit, it's not just about the technology, it's really about the people. So it's how do we get the people in the public sector talking together? And it's only by doing that that we can really achieve some of these ambitions that we've got. And I mean, just to say, like that, a group alone won't really, or the set of people that we've got who've said they're really interested in helping us direct what we do next, alone, they're not going to be able to do much. And we have to think a little bit about that bigger data ecosystem that we have in Scotland and how we can pull some of these different bits together, so and integrate them. So I already mentioned the communities of practice, the data maturity programme. We've got a whole range of other things that we've been building in Scotland, and we now need to think about how all of those fit and pull everything together. So the last slide was just so that hopefully we'll improve the way that we all talk within the public sector, the aim that we have for data in Scotland, all to make these differences to the people who live in Scotland. So thanks very much, and that's where you can get you can see the vision online if you want to get a little bit more information. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And we'll make sure that we have those links available when we blog post after the event as well. Just a reminder to everyone watching us online, but also in the room, if you want to put questions via Slido, it's bit.ly/databytes52, all lowercase, if you're not already there. Let's stay in the room for the first question. We've got one hand right there at the back.
Hello, yes, thank you for that. The idea of giving data professionals in Scotland one voice seems incredibly valuable. What I'm interested in is whether there's anything the voices you've gathered have told you not to do. Because we always talk about what we should do with data. I'm really interested in the counter examples where what if people looked at you and said, please do not go near that, that is just a money pit. Thank you.
I don't know if I can say that there's things that we've sort of said don't go near, but I think one of the things that we've sort of been conscious of as we've been going through this process is to try not to bring it back down to the technical angle all the time, because we get lost in detail and everyone has a different way of doing it. And we have so many systems in Scotland that it becomes a very different type of conversation. So maybe all I can say here is that what we've tried to do is just raise it up a little bit so that we don't talk about the technology, that we think about what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with this. And we're not expecting people to instantly go and change their technologies or change the strategies that they've already got, but think about ways that they can start to align over the next few years to that direction of travel that we're trying to aim for. But maybe Joyce, I don't know if there was anything that you thought when we were going through some of these workshops that we should be avoiding. It's a good question.
Yeah, I think what we've got is, looking at the feedback that we've had from the 71, is that we have a lot of people asking for more stuff. They want it to be more specific. They want it to answer their questions. And even today, I was in meetings today with people talking about the vision, and they were like, but is it going to do this for me? Is basically what we get asked a lot of.
We do.
The answer to that is probably not. But what it will do is that it will. What will it do? It will probably help. It will probably help the conversation for them, but it won't necessarily do the doing for them. So I'm trying to think, of things. So it's got a very long wish list, and that's what we are digesting now in readiness for making the next iteration. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a question over there, and I'll come to you next.
Good evening, Rishi Sharda from Tata Consultancy Services. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just wondering, at a country strategy type level, is there another country that you look at of a similar shape, size, budget to Scotland that you think, actually, we want to kind of map what they're doing, how they use their data, how they implement their technology to deliver the sort of citizen services that you aspire? Is there something that you sort of direct kind of map onto at all?
Again, I think when we had some of the, we had consultants, we had LunarWorks come in, and they've done a lot of work for maybe not countries, but looking at sort of some of the big cities over in Europe, or some of the big, I would call them councils, I guess, over in Europe. So we had a little bit, we knew that they'd been doing some work like this in some of those areas. So, that, I guess that's where we got some of these ideas from. Again, maybe the vision isn't, when you start to talk about that level of detail, we're not there yet. So I think maybe that there's some stuff that we're going to have to do next that might be along those lines. And I mean there are some of the sort of classic, is it Estonia, places that we know, that we've always looked at. But I don't think we're quite there with that. But again, I'm going to see if Joyce has got anything she wants to say on that question.
Yeah, funnily enough, when you asked that question, somebody said to me quite recently, "Oh, please don't make it Estonia. I'm bored of Estonia." It's interesting because if you think about the population of Scotland, being quite small, and probably some of the larger authorities within England, so Scotland's probably smaller than some of them. But yeah, I'd agree with Shona. We're not at that level because this is the thing that's quite that we're kind of we're kind of working our way through, is that we're not at the solution stage or looking to recommend solutions. This idea of a ripple effect we're sort of in the centre. We're not doing this because this is a Scottish Government policy. We're doing this because it kind of made sense for us to do it because we were in the centre. So if we do this work and we help facilitate and enable somebody working in another public sector organisation, they'll be the ones speaking to their stakeholders and clients and service users and building their products. So I don't know if we'll ever be in that zone, but hey, who knows?
And maybe just to say that we think a lot of the answers that we need are happening in Scotland already. Like, I think we've got lots of really, really good work going on, but maybe not everyone is aware of it, or, people aren't talking about it. So I think a lot of the work that we're trying to do over the next little while is really pull all of those different groups of people that are doing great things and talk about it a lot more and share the sort of experiences and knowledge that already exists within the public sector.
Brilliant, thanks. We had a question down here towards the front.
Thank you. Hi, Sam Ross from BMT. You mentioned the importance of data-informed decision-making. Quite interested to know what, from your perspective, that looks and feels like, and perhaps how you're planning to assess that.
So, I feel like I'm giving the same answer every time here. At the very high level, and I'm gonna pull up, I guess, what we have in the actual vision itself. So this was about making Scotland a leader in data-informed decision-making, innovation, and addressing sort of societal and grand challenges. And it was really all about data for good. So, like, that we really understand the value of data and what it can really, and how it's used. That we're not afraid to act on what the data tells us, but that we have like the right sort of regulatory and rights frameworks in place to make sure, that about the way that we're using data. So, if that was our kind of objective around it, and then the conditions that we felt we need is to have that more mature data ecosystem. So we need to know that organisations have got that maturity level, in order to be able to do that data for good, which will then help us meet that ambition. So, it's that kind of level that we're seeing in the vision itself. So it's not. It's not a lot of detail, but it's saying that's the end point that we want to get to. So I don't know if that helps. So maybe not the detail that you're looking for, but that's what we're trying to get to. Yes.
I'll squeeze in one final very quick question. Oh, we've got one at the back. Excellent.
Hello, hi, my name is Yatra, I'm from the National Archives. I'm actually in the middle of establishing a data and analysis community of practice group, and I was just wondering if you currently do any kind of networking events with existing groups, whether they're established or not, within Scotland or London, because I'd be very much interested in, kind of attending that with the group, and just, hearing more about that kind of stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, as part of this, like the idea here is that we knew simply setting up like a governance group wasn't going to be enough, that we needed to put other sort of bits of the jigsaw in place. So we've created two communities of practice in Scotland, one of which has been running for quite some time. It's called the Better Data Community of Practice, and that really focuses on how do you improve your data. So it's looking at bringing people in to talk about things like standards, talking about quality, about data management, about change management, lots of theory of change stuff, getting people to think about outcomes a little bit more. That community of practice is open to anyone. So we have a ticket tailor page that I can give to somebody, and if you just keep an eye on that, you can join, and we run it by themes, so we usually have a theme per month. So that's one community of practice. We've got another one that Joyce actually manages, which is a community of practice that we run alongside the Data Lab. But Joyce, I don't know if you want to jump in here and just talk about that one as well.
Yeah, so my baby, more fledgling community of practice is kind of the other side of the coin of better data. So we're kind of focused more on innovation and bringing in people so what I do mainly is stalk LinkedIn. I look for interesting projects that are sort of in the public sector. I then will ask the people to come and speak. I decided not to try and build from scratch. So the Data Lab had a really Data Lab Innovation Centre for Scotland. They've got a big community of about 6,000 members. So we created there was a space in there focused on the public sector. Equally, that group of 6,000 is international. There's over 1,000 people on our public sector one. Not everyone is public sector. Not everybody's in Scotland, and anyone is welcome to join that too. So we've had a few sessions, and what's been really interesting, we've had projects quite large and small shared, but what they do is, I think, and the aim of it is it gives people confidence to try something different, try something, maybe even just if you're a single-handed data person in a public sector organisation, to realise that there are people in the same boat. They're trying to do good stuff. They're trying to change stuff, and there's a little bit of lived example for them. So that's the kind of feedback we're getting. It's early days and it's growing. So always happy to have speakers or any interest. So please, we'll give links to people and they can sign up.
And we will
absolutely
happily publish them as well. So do send them through. And hopefully this is the start of the conversation rather than the end. So Shona and Joyce, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us. Yeah. Thank you.
And some similar themes came up in the previous Data Bites as well. So Anna Tritchkind's presentation, well worth visiting as well. Brings us back into the room for our final presentation of the evening. So Keen, he's already up there at the lectern. I'm now going to keep speaking to make you wait.
I know I'm the last one, so I'm keeping us from drinks afterwards. So I will try and be as brief as possible. But I'm not going to be condensing 45 minutes, but I'm condensing sort of half an hour or so presentation as part of a 2 and a bit hour launch event that we did back in December. So I do encourage you to go watch on YouTube the actual full launch event with 2 interesting panels of academics and practitioner speakers. But I'm Matt Kerlogue. I'm from the Blavatnik School of Government, and I'm going to talk to you about the Blavatnik Index of Public Administration. For those of you who has the clicker worked? Yes. For those of you who don't know about the Blavatnik School of Government, we're based at the University of Oxford. Our vision is of a world better led, better served and better governed. We are the global school that teaches graduate and doctorate candidates, again, in government, public administration, public management, public policy. But we also do wide-ranging sets of research. We've got a big global hub for what works in education that's funded by the FCDO. We have the Government Outcomes Lab, which looks very specifically at sort of social impact related commissioning and other cross-sector partnership working, plus all sorts of things that you'd expect in a School of Government. And we also do lots of engagement and direct work with governments to help them think about how to reform their civil services, reform their public administrations, their public sector working, work with politicians. And that's partly where sort of the Blavatnik Index comes in. It's really a sort of piece that we want to sort of use to help particularly senior leaders think about how they can learn from others, to encourage peer learning from each other in a sort of data-driven way. Too often, certainly from my prior experience when I've worked in the Cabinet Office in sort of doing some international work on public governance, too often we just talk to our friends. We just talk to the Americans and the Canadians and sometimes the Australians if they make it to Paris for an OECD meeting. We might also talk to Estonia or Scandinavians, etc. But it's those that we know and we just talk to regularly, and we think we don't necessarily go and reach out to who might be best. I think there's all lots of caveats about sort of limitations about the quality of the data we have, but it's the best available. It builds on work the school previously did with the Cabinet Office and the Institute for Government under the guise of the International Civil Service Effectiveness Index, for which published 2 versions in 2017 and 2019. That was limited to 38 OECD countries. In 2023, the school took a decision to re-establish the work, something called the COVID-19 pandemic got in the way after the 2019 edition was published. But in 2023, we decided to re-establish the work, having had a number of governments get in touch with us and sort of interested now that sort of pandemic had started to ease, were coming back to thinking about how they reform their civil services and trying to sort of use sort of comparative information. So the revised index that we've published actually has expanded country coverage from 38 to 120 countries. We've the availability of data that we have has improved. It's sort of enhanced that. We've revised the framework as well, based on a variety of feedback we received, both from the Insights project itself, but also over the course of 2020, the sort of start of 2024, doing sort of outreach and engagement work with countries, with academics, and we've been supported in that through a oversight board. And just very quickly, I'll move on in a second to show you the framework, but we've drawn on 82 metrics from 17 different sources. So it's a mix of data from multilateral institutions, so the World Bank, the UN, OECD, civil society research studies, other academic work, etc. So we're pulling together lots of disparate data that already exists to help senior civil servants and cabinet secretaries think about how they can manage their civil services. We do this through a sort of conceptual framework. We have the index overall, we're sort of the black box of the civil service, if you want to think. Sort of we, as those of us who are in the room, probably are much more familiar with how government works, but sometimes it can seem to outsiders a bit of a mystery. But we've got 4 domains. So it's the blue box in the middle that we're measuring. We're not really measuring anything about inputs, and we're not measuring anything about outcomes. We want to sort of, our theory of change, although can't necessarily measure it properly, is that governments that are more effective are going to deliver better outcomes given the same sort of inputs. We've got 4 domains around strategy and leadership, public policy, national delivery, and people and processes. We've got a set of themes underneath them. I'm aware I'm rapidly running out of time. But we take those 82 metrics, we take them down to the index overall. We're only measuring national level government, and we use only open access data and methodologies. All of our data is open source, as is our methodology. But most importantly, it's a relative assessment rather than benchmarking anything sort of specific absolute standards. And people should be using this in conjunction with other data. This is not definitive. Our rankings are not definitive, but I will come to our rankings. And we've got Singapore at the top, but very quickly followed by Norway, Canada, Denmark, Finland. UK is coming 6th, not in the top 5, jointly with New Zealand, Australia. But I think one of the really interesting stories for us is that actually we've got 4 countries coming in 9th position. They're all scoring the same, but actually you can just about see their patterns across the 4 different domains that underlie the index are actually slightly different. They've all got different strengths across the domains. And I think that's really where the power of this lies. I won't focus too much on regional international differences, but again, because we've got 120 countries, we're able to sort of customise and tailor this to countries for their own particular interests. We're doing some conversations at the moment with folk in Brazil. We're getting a visit from Nigeria to the school in March, and we're going to have a conversation then with them as part of their study with us. But given we're in the UK, and most of us are thinking about the UK public sector in here, won't focus too heavily on the overall scores. I'll encourage you to go and look at the index afterwards. But particularly given we talk about data and digital in this room often, the UK scores not particularly well. So linking back to the start when Gavin was talking about the data strategy, or digital strategy, sorry. The use of data, we rank 26th, and on digital services, we rank 31st. Now, the overall numbers mask some very different variations underneath. So on use of data, we're measuring largely, at the moment, only really measuring the availability of and depth of official statistics. We do have one measure on data reuse, and I'll come to that on the next slide. But I think what's really interesting comparison here is, so the UK's here in blue. Norway is the top country in overall, and the other dark bars show other high-income countries. So again, this is the other thing, that we have 120 different countries in this, but really thinking about who your peer group is really valuable and useful. These are the underlying indicators. Norway, we don't have anything on data capability and governance, but again, it's really on this data reuse one that's a measure that's actually about the reuse of data in policy documents and actually the things that are published. So we're not very good at actually talking about data when we publish things on gov.uk about how we've come to make our decisions. And then in my last 30 seconds, talking about digital, the UK does not, as I say, 31st is where we rank. France ranks 5th. And I think this is a really interesting sort of comparison here because on digital strategy and policy, we're doing as well as the French. On end user services, we're just ahead by only about 3 places. But it's on cross-government infrastructure, so actually the ability and interoperability that we're really lagging behind. This is all actually based on stuff that GDS have submitted to the GovTech Maturity Index that's run by the World Bank, which is the underlying data. That data also does publish and support our openness and communication, innovation and technology and workplaces themes, because it's quite broad-spaced. So I do encourage you to go and look more. Hopefully this has been a very rapid tour that's whetted your appetite, and I suggest you go to look at the website itself. There's a few copies of the report at the back, and there's a postcard if you want to take away and can't remember the QR code. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. I'm sure nobody's got any questions about the data or digital rankings in this room. If you would like to submit those questions via Slido, as somebody already has, you can go to bit.ly/databytes52 if you're not already there. But I will start off in the room if anyone wants to put their hand up. Who would like to ask the first question? We've got one there, and then we'll come down to the front.
Sorry, obligatory anthropologist question. The qualitative is missing from this. I mean, obviously by design, because there's only so much you can do with a bar chart. But we could say that the US over the last week has used data extremely strongly. The way that people use data is political and not necessarily for good. What's the outcome that you want to generate from governments with this? What would be the perfect impact for you?
So I think you're quite right. Yes, obviously it naturally excludes qualitative, and I think that's where the richness comes in. Is the sort of the point here is that this is hopefully encourages officials to think a bit differently about how they when they're approaching a sort of reform agendas, and they sort of, obviously naturally lots of that is domestic, and then there's a bit of talking to your friends, but actually go out and find out we've identified maybe we've got a problem in our HR systems or in our tax service, etc. What's the data that's out there that we can use to go and then have a conversation to learn actually what's there in practice? That sort of how do we change? What is it? What is the difference? What can we do? So it's about sort of trying to find a way through to that sort of more qualitative sort of learning that should be done on a sort of bilateral or sort of small peer group sort of exchange.
Thanks. We've got a question right down at the front.
Thanks very much. I've had the benefit of looking at the report in advance, and I wanted to ask a question about data quality, because you rank data quality from A to D. And I'm surprised to see that Norway has D in terms of data quality. And is it advantageous or disadvantageous for a country to have poor or good data quality in your index?
There's a lovely chart I can send you. There's actually it's also on our methodology documents. But actually, data quality actually ranges from A to F. We only publish data for we've only published and covered the index for countries that have data quality from A to D. There's no correlation that we found between the overall index results and quality. Quality is partly driven by sort of coverage. So in going to the sort of 120 countries, we've had to change our sort of choices around sources. Actually, sort of the previous insights work really focused on sort of what was available for sort of maximising the data coverage across its framework, which is slightly different. And as a result, only really looks at OECD countries, where there is certainly some much richer data. But there is certain data sets. The Scandinavian countries and some of the Baltics don't participate in some of the open data collections, actually, which is quite interesting, given the sort of they're known for being open. So that's sort of the crux of that.
I'm going to go online for a couple of questions, and we'll come back to data sourcing in a second. But first of all, we've got a question from Anonymous, which is, would the UK be number one if we liberated the postcode address file?
I don't think any of the underlying data sources we currently use assess the availability of address information. But I'm aware that is a consistent issue and bugbear for campaigners around data quality, openness of data in the UK.
We expect to see a dedicated indicator to that for that one in the next survey. But going to another anonymous question from online, how flawed are the data sources used? So, for example, the UN index reflects ideas of digital government from 20 years ago.
Yeah, so actually we don't use the UN index specifically, actually because it doesn't meet our thresholds for the openness of its methodology and its data collection, actually. Because although they publish the overall rankings, you cannot sort of get to the nth of actually what they have actually, they don't publish online what they actually measure specifically. It's a bit of a black box to us, so therefore it's a black box to anybody working in government. We want to sort of, that's the sort of, again, the crux of this was sort of making sure we do this in an open way so that others can go in and have a look at the data themselves, get to the nth degree of the source data, so you can, once you've worked out, oh, in a relative sense, we're better or worse than these guys, let's go and actually look at what the data itself really tells us, and encourage that. But yeah, there's naturally limitations in the data sort of quality. We are only using sort of multilateral sources, which are obviously most of those are driven by government self-assessments. And there are quality checks that go on inside inside those institutions to verify the things that are submitted by government, but those are submissions by government to those institutions. There are civil society collections, which again, there's sort of what partial information they have available. So, for example, there is data collected about financial management, about transparency of financial management documents and budget practices, which is published through the Open Budget Survey, which is a really good resource, but it's limited to only what you can see from the outside, and actually sometimes that doesn't tell you the real picture. And in analysing the sort of the data that's there, it doesn't really take account of certainly lots of concerns around sort of corruption in public finances, and you can't really strip that out. And there aren't really great indicators about what proportion of a government of a country's sort of budget is not being told in these documents and things like that. So we haven't included that as an indicator this time round. So there are definitely limitations, but these are the data that are available, and one of our aims has been just to sort of package this. It's partly about packaging this in a way that is digestible to senior leaders who don't necessarily have the domain specialism, that they can then to sort of encourage them to think about this as something they can go and look at, they can go and probe, and yeah, if they want to say no, then we don't agree with this, and that's fine for them. But yeah,
great, thank you. I've got a question there, and then right at the back. So I'll come to the one in front first. Oh,
someone else.
It was the, yeah. You're all very polite. We'll try and squeeze you all in. But.
I just wanted to have your view on a hypothesis regarding bad data quality. And I wonder if bad data quality equals higher spend on procurement by a country, and therefore less successful adoption and sustainable improvement in services.
Ooh. That's a difficult hypothesis to sort of test in the moment. I think you probably have to take that one away. Unfortunately, it's not one I sort of can feel I can give an answer to at this point. But I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline, because it's probably one that I'll spend about 10 minutes having an answer to.
And if we can very quickly, we'll take the one right at the back, but also the one just in front of you first. So, well, let's go back and then we'll get you both in. Keep them short.
Thank you. Paul Mobby from Faculty, an applied AI company. So appetite's wetter. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it's not really the point of the index, but given you've got all the insight from poring over the data, I'm really interested in the Matt Kerlogue top 5 bits of advice for the UK government if it wanted to move up the standings.
Well, I think actually, the slides I showed actually show you that I think the two areas that are particularly of interest are sort of that piece around cross-government infrastructure. Certainly, from my experience previously as an analyst in the Cabinet Office, cross-government sort of infrastructure for data sharing, for running digital projects, etc., is definitely sort of an area of need and problems. So that's my top one.
Somebody should set up a national data library. And let's take the final question.
Tom Hart from ODI. I'm going from the kind of UK-focused international. I'd expect a lot of the kind of indicators to be correlated with income per capita. Are there any countries that really surprised you, either because they're high-income countries that perform particularly badly, or lower-income countries that perform particularly well?
So I think my first one would be sort of to reflect back to the conversation in the previous session with Scotland about Estonia. Actually, Estonia, I would have always expected them to do well. I was surprised they got to top 10 actually, but I wasn't surprised to see them being the best of the Eastern European set. And it's surprising actually how well quite a number of Eastern European countries come to within the top 25. I think of lower income countries, I think Indonesia does actually quite well. Or they're upper middle actually income. But yeah, there's definitely sort of some interesting surprises in that set, but I think it really talks to the next point. Is the really interesting thing is about going to that sort of next level, working with countries to talk about who their particular peer groups are. Your ranking inside 120 isn't really great. In Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, Rwanda does very well compared to a lot of its peers. Ghana is certainly on a number of issues is also quite strong, as is Kenya. So there's definitely learnings that we can sort of, countries don't always have to learn from the West in that sort of traditional development sort of assistance process. It's actually how can we engender sort of that sort of sharing across communities and practice that way, yeah, certainly.
Well, plenty in the report and on the website for everyone to dig into, but Matt, thank you for giving us a very strong flavour of it. Thank you very much indeed. I'm actually the one between you and the drinks, so I will keep this very short. You will be... Sorry, I feel like a proper crooner now or something. I'm not going to sing, it's fine. So you'll be able to watch all of this back on YouTube or Slido already as live, and there will be a blog post, audio and polished video that follows. The next Data Bites will be on Wednesday, the 5th of March. And as ever, please do get in touch with us, events@public.digital, if you've got any speaker offers or suggestions. And a huge thank you to finish to Public Digital, as ever, for hosting, to all of you for coming and some brilliant questions and conversations tonight, and of course to our 5 brilliant speakers. See you next month, and please join me in a huge round of applause for our brilliant presenters this evening. And drinks will be appearing.